Well, hello everybody. This is David Bianco. Welcome back to the channel. Well, it was back on September 16th, 2022 that Chad Kassem announced that Analog Productions would be releasing the catalog of Steely Dan albums on UHQR 2LP 45 RPM formats starting in the following month. And we got Can't Buy a Thrill. We've also got Countdown to Ecstasy and Pretzel Logic. But the one everybody was waiting for the most, and the one that Chad is going to be making 30,000 of instead of 20,000 of, is Aja. And that just got released October 27th, 2023. I've got it, I've listened to it, and my impressions of it are coming up next as we take our next Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Steely Dan's Aja has been one of the classic landmark audiophile recordings that was made in 1977. It's used to test systems, it's used to show how well cartridges and speakers perform. It's a classic in every sense of the word. And it crosses rock, pop, jazz fusion to be one that is compelled for many to be their go-to record for testing these systems. Now, when this was announced for this release through Analog Productions, Chad Kassem indicated they were going to release 30,000 or press 30,000 copies, which is 10,000 more than the rest of the series. The demand for this album and the popularity of it justified doing something extra. And again, in this case, we have Bernie Grundman mastering this one again on 4 sides. Now, the source for this was, of course, the original analog tape, but it's qualified as to what that is. It was an analog non-EQ'd tape copy. So it is not the original, but it is non-EQ'd and it is a direct copy from the master tape. So that is something to consider. But will it affect things? We're going to find out. One of the things that was really interesting with this release, of course, is there's so much demand for this and so many pre-orders on it. Analog Productions couldn't get them all out on the FedEx truck on the Friday of release. They were only able to get out about 4,000 before the FedEx truck was full, and they had to wait until Monday to get the rest of those put into trucks. So they had their boxing done, but they didn't have a capacity from the shipping standpoint to get it through. It's another example of why I really kind of hate new releases coming out on Fridays. A lot of times they used to come out on Tuesdays, which would give you then time to have that next shipment a day later, not after the weekend. Well, waiting an extra couple of days always makes it tough in some ways, especially when one like myself is anxious to give you a review of this. And having just got back from Sweden, I thought that's going to be great. As soon as I get back, I'm ready to hit it and do it. Well, I got it today on Wednesday, well packaged as always, in number 1803, so I didn't even get one with the sticker outside, which has the number, but that's fine. It is what it is. So this one was really fun to do because the music is so familiar and the expectations are so familiar that diving into it really is something you can almost do in stride. And that's what I did. I really was blown away originally by this album when I first heard it back in 1977. I remember it was near a time when I had just gotten some really decent hi-fi equipment. And this was one of the first albums that I can remember that I really said, whoa, I'm really glad I have something that's able to reproduce something even better, because this sounds really top shelf. And although it wasn't an analog pressing in and of itself, it certainly had the production of that clean analog audiophile kind of sound to it, and it always has. So this one has special meaning to a lot of us, and as it relates to the Steely Dan catalog, I'm sure it is the one that we've waited for the most, because many felt like, I'm not sure this can be bested, but that's what we're here to find out. Aja was Steely Dan's 6th studio album, and as far as charting goes, it got to be number 3 in the US and up to number 5 in the UK, sold over 5 million copies. Definitely a very strong album for Steely Dan. The inner notes on the album indicate that it was signaling the onset of a new maturity and a kind of solid professionalism that is the hallmark of an artist that has arrived. So the impressions were this was in fact the culmination of the 5 previous works that had been done, and Steely Dan at its best. And so what we have here from Analog Productions is Clarity vinyl on 2 records, A, B, C, and D sides. I always indicate at the beginning things like this to let you know. So side A shows to be RE-3 in the dead wax, which means it was the 4th one that Chad picked out of however many he had done by Bernie. This was number 4 that he settled in on as the best. And it has 2 tracks on it that total 13 minutes and 3 seconds. Side B is an RE2, meaning it was the 3rd cut or lacquer that Bernie provided to Chad and the one that he selected. And this is a single song, Deacon Blues, at 7 minutes and 26 seconds. Side C is RE1, which means it is the 2nd lacquer that Bernie had cut that Chad selected, and it has 2 tracks totaling 9 minutes and 28 seconds. And finally, side D, another RE1, meaning it is the 2nd lacquer that Chad had given to him that he selected from Bernie, and it totals 10:33. So we have a range. We have side A being the longest at 13:03, side B being one song at 7:26, and the other ones being 9 to 10 minutes. So definitely that 45 RPM, giving plenty of room for that groove to be cut. I will be providing a ranking of these comparisons as it relates to the pressings and a numeric value toward the end of this video. But right now, I want to focus on the tracks on the album and specifically what I wrote as my impressions of these songs as I heard them on the UHQR. The first track on side 1 is Black Cow. With right at the first beat here, you know it's time to hang on. It's tight, it's accurate, but not pushed or exaggerated like the MoFi LP that I'll talk about later. The vocals are very open and airy with just the right touch of echo. They're smooth backing vocals that are layered just above the lead vocals, and the separation of instruments is very distinct and obvious with a precise sound clarity to them. The horns in this song flow through the rhythm and augment the smoothness of the flow of these songs, especially toward the middle of this. And again, nothing here is overly pronounced or forced, but it's really perfectly balanced. It brings full detail to the listening room. And the Wayne Shorter tenor sax solo is smooth. It blends into the track's percussion and dynamics. It's like butter. That's all I could say about Black Cow. It really is a great start to this album and a great start to the sonics that really were like, wow, have I heard this before? I really am hearing some real distinct sounds in this pressing and in this mastering. So we move along to the second cut on side A, Aja, the title track. The piano openness at the start of this presents an airiness not experienced really before by me, at least this much airiness. The percussions are very precise and detailed with really an in-the-room kind of sound, like you are there. The vocals present a smoothness and kind of float a bit above the music, and the instrumental interludes in the middle have a tight and precise inflection with the percussion lines forming into the room a full aura of being like on a desert island. Like it's very open and airy, and like, you can just almost kind of feel wind hitting you, kind of a thing, of the openness of it, and some of the instrumentation and percussion sounds that you hear that very much would sound like what you might hear on a desert island. The drums and the cymbals are just right, highly present, but not taking over the mix. And the guitar work of Denny Diaz, Larry Carrollton, and Walter Becker are interlaced throughout this song with flair and tenacity. And as if that isn't enough, again, you have Wayne Shorter's tenor sax solo cutting through and rising above the music as if to create a near three-dimensional presentation. And the drums, wow, those are unbelievable during the sax solo. They are so freaking precise. And for me as a drummer, I listen for that, and I got to tell you, I had to play it twice in a row because it was just so distinct to me. And again, in this song, as the vocals began again after the midsection, the song settles into a section of super accurate musicianship that reminds me of why this is a solid classic. And finally, the ending section of the song brings forth an energy that builds to new peaks without any distortion, and the instrumentation separation is to die for. Really, kind of like, as good as the opening track was, this is like cherry on top. And you're thinking, wow, I got a lot out of this just by side A with those two songs. So flipping over to side 2, we get to Deacon Blues, which is in fact given one side all to itself. Unfortunately, on my copy, the track began with a little bit of pre-echo, and what that is hearing the beginning of track 1 revolution in advance. But once I get past that, the song started, the vocals are very open with a slight echo impression, and they stay more present and forward than they were in Black Cow and Aja. Further, this song really doesn't have quite the same hard-hitting impacts as those first two songs, but the cymbal work during the sax solo are so precise and meaningful and really give you the impression that you're sitting there right by that drum kit. Now, the backing vocals in the second half of the song join in that open, airy feel to the song and present a sound signature that brings presence to Donald Fagen's vocals. And that's really good to hear because there's a great blending of the voices as the second stanza of this particular song is sung. And I can't help but mention the guitar riffs throughout to the end of the song have some precise and plucky sounds that are even more pronounced than I've ever heard it before. So it's a joy to pick up these extra sounds and these extra precisions that before were there, but they were kind of muddied in and blended in to previous pressings that I have heard. Now, getting to the second record with Peg on the first track, again, we had a little pre-echo at the beginning of that. But talk about a tight intro. The snare hits and the hi-hat riffs are just so much more evident right from the jump on this song, and they get you. The lead vocals stay forward in light of the breadth of the instrumentation encompassing it. So there's a lot going on, but the vocals still stay frontward towards you and make their impression upon you in spite of all the instrumentation activity that goes on. There's so much going on with guitars and percussion, and it has its own well-defined space and placement. And that's another reason why I think the vocals stand forward and distinct, is because there isn't this muddledness going on. There's very, very precise imaging and separation that occurs. And then the background vocals here, especially Michael McDonald, are very well placed and precise and complementary to the lead vocal and the instrumentation on this song. So again, it's a short song, it's a top 40 song, but it really sounds rich on this UHQR. The second song on side C, Home at Last, has a very open echo sound to the piano intro. It's really wide open, much more than on the other pressings. The spatial separation of the instruments here is very evident, as this isn't quite as busy of a song with heavy percussive elements as some of the other ones. So some of these things can stand on their own a little more objectively because they're there without the interference of some of the other instrumentation on previous songs. The identification of the musical elements and their place in the sound stage is a no-brainer on this track. They are very distinct and precise. And this presents a feast of audio enjoyment of the craft work of these musicians and the high standards that drove Steely Dan in making this classic LP. And the drum and cymbal work toward the end of the track really drew me in, thinking that, again, that drum kit was right there next to me. And that, for me, is something that presents to me something that I can relate to, and it's something that really doesn't exist in the other pressings to kind of make that emotional connection. And I think that that's the important part of this album. There is a certain emotional connection that existed, and it always was on a fairly high level. But this kind of really brings you up a notch. It really takes you even further in the respect and really the enjoyment of something that has so much going on, but yet you can really delineate out the sounds in spite of all of the traffic, so to speak, of the instrumentation. Flipping it over to the final side with D1, the first track, I've got the news. It's got this solid beat and riff at the beginning as an intro, and it has a really nice clean vocal that's supplanted there by some great piano work by Fagan. So that really stands out right out of the box. And in this song, the cymbal hits are just so precise and accurate, with the bass drum kicks attenuating the beat without being overbearing. The horns here are much more smooth than some of the sax solos, which obviously they have a little grainier sound to them, but these horns are just so smooth, like butter, like I said before, that they really accentuate the song. And the backing vocals here bring forward a distinction of these singers more individually, that as a blended group has a unique impact. So it really instead of having that everybody's voice together, there was some distinctiveness in it, and yet the aura of the sound was still them collaborating with the lead vocal. And the xylophone hits here are set forward and lend kind of a happy spirit to the whole jazz riff about it, and them standing out like that really makes you recognize some of the emotional feeling you get out of this song and where it comes from. And then the remainder of the song is just a musician's blend of great percussion, guitar riffs, musical craftsmanship, again, which makes Aja such a classic. And the final song on side D is Josie. So at the beginning here, you got this guitar riff and echo that are extremely precise, along with the snare drum hi-hat following it. So it really is kind of like a movement that these instrumentations are kind of following each other through the beginning of this. And then Fagan's vocal jumps out and stands out with this open airiness and right balance of echo and emphasis in this song. But you can't help but marvel at what these musicians are doing to create this track. Mid-song in it, the instrumentals really open up with unsurpassed openness. I mean, it really gets to where you're really able to say, wow, listen to all the instrumentation, listen to these distinct sounds. They present themselves kind of in a cornucopia of effort that blends together to something that really is pleasing to the ear. And these luscious sounds and interwoven riffs and sonic impressions that are there, you know, it's a really kind of like a cold shower to realize this is the last song. My gosh, is it over? Wow, you just you just can't believe in some ways how short this album is, now that you really took it all in and you go, it's over. And the enjoyment is so strong when you listen to it that you just don't want it to end. So this album presentation through the UHQR really is one of those situations where it's definitely more icing and more of a cherry on top. It just has so many distinctions there that set it onto a new plateau, a new sound, a new distinction, a new impression, and in the end, a new appreciation. And I think that's really, for me, the biggest learning. The appreciation of what all was in this that really got delineated out in this pressing. So if you like this album, this clearly is the one you have to have. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, all the others I have, I could sell and never look back. Let me talk about a few of them. The Mobile Fidelity, when you listen to that, you've got kind of a loss of mid-range because they're busy emphasizing the bottom end and they're busy emphasizing the top end and they're pushing those things and it's not balanced whatsoever. When I start A-Bing some of these tracks, it's like some of the music is literally lost on the Mobile Fidelity. And it's much more clear that it's lost when you're playing the UHQR right up against it, because you're trying to hear some of that sound and it really is not there to any magnitude on the Mobile Fidelity because they're so busy trying to over-impress you with the bass and the treble. So the Mobile Fidelity really, is kind of out. I mean, it just really, this really makes the gap on that one all the more apparent. Now, when I go back to my original, which is an AB 1006 Santa Maria, probably one of the best pressings you can get of this. It is very good for an original, very strong. And absent sitting there and comparing it to the UHQR, it's a winner. There's nothing at all that you would think is wanting whatsoever, and it's very strong. So it really is one that comes in second because now the UHQR has in fact bested it. Now, I do have a couple others that I have that I listen to against this. I have a couple of Canadian ones that are color vinyl, an orange reddish vinyl, and then a yellow. And they're basically the same plates, I think, press those. They were a little bit noisy. They didn't have quite the dynamics. They were okay, but they weren't nearly as good as the AB 1006 Santa Maria. And a 2008 Back to Black reissue, which there's two of those that come out. There's one that has 1A and 1B in the dead wax and another that is 2A or 2B. And the lacquer on the 1A, 1B is cut by Greg Moore. That's the one you want if you want this version. And it is decent, but it is not as good as the original, but it is better than those Canadian color versions. But again, the new go-to is in fact going to be the UHQR. It's not really even close. So let's take a look at what the ratings are. So the first pressing, the AB 1006 Santa Maria, quiet vinyl's an 8, its bass is a 9, mid-range is an 8.5, as are the highs, and the imaging and openness and airiness is an 8. The Canadian color ones, I show noisiness as a 6.5. It's definitely noisier vinyl. It's 7.5 on bass and mid-range and highs, so it's not as good as the original, and its airiness is only a 6 because it just seems to have a little compression to it. The Mobile Fidelity is going to be an interesting rating. Stay with me here. So the vinyl is very quiet. It's about a 9.5. But the bass I give a 7 in comparison, but they tried to make the bass an 11. They tried to push it. So that 11 is just telling you they tried to make the bass sound like an 11, but it was not satisfying because it was over the top. Same with the treble. So its rating number got to be a 7 across the board for that. And the imaging and openness and airiness of it is a 6. partly because some of that mid-range is sucked out and you lose that there. The Back to Black 2008 reissue with the vinyl quietness rated an 8 and an 8 for the lows, mids, and highs as well, which is less than the first pressing and better than the Canadian and the MoFi. And the imaging and openness and airiness is not quite as good as the original at 7.5. And again, if you want to get that one, the A1B1 in the dead wax is cut by Greg Moore. That's better than the one that doesn't have his name on it because it was a secondary cut. And those were pressed at Record Industry. And finally, the Analog Productions 2x45 UHQR. We get a 9.5 across the board, except for openness, imaging, and airiness. I give it a 10 because it's just, I just don't know what else you can do there. So overall, what we see here is that the Analog Productions averages a 9.6, while the OG averages an 8.5. So definitely a marked enough improvement for you to hear the difference and enjoy it. Here's a little bonus that I decided to tack on. I usually don't make any comparisons, of course, to vinyl and CDs, but I happen to have the Mobile Fidelity Gold CD of Aja, and I thought it would be interesting to pop this on my Oppo player and listen to it and do a comparison. So I did, and I'm going to give you the ratings for this one as well. So what we've got here is vinyl quietness. Well, quietness is a 10 because this is a CD. So you got that one nailed for sure. But when we get to the lower end, it rates an 8.5, and then the mids are an 8, and the highs are an 8, and the openness, airiness, and imaging are an 8 as well. So it's decent. It's definitely better than the MoFi vinyl, which really was trying to push the bottom and the top end. They did not, it appears at all, take that mastering approach with that gold CD. So it's pretty decent, and matter of fact, better than the standard CD that came out. So at least we know it's good, but again, this UHQR is just so hard to beat. Like I always say, this is how I heard it on my system with my ears. Is this something you should invest $150 in? Well, only if you really like this album. But as I said, for me, I'm willing to now, sell the others I have because frankly, this one is the GOAT. It is the top one, and it's clear. If I wanted a 33 RPM of this, I probably, the Back to Black is probably a low dollar one that you could get, but my OG, I would keep that one. But again, on the secondary market, those are a little expensive. So you have to make the call of what you want to do. But if you wanted to know whether the Analog Productions UHQR could best the previous releases, and I've heard of Cisco, I don't have one, and my impression of it was that it beat, but not hugely, but beat the OG, but not by a huge margin. Whereas I would say the margin here is larger. The margin of improvement against the OG is pretty powerful with this pressing. Part of me wanted to give it a 10 all the way across the board, but I just always have that trouble of doing that. But this is about as close as I could come in my mind to saying that it hit it out of the park on all of the sonic aspects. I still would do a 9.5 on the vinyl because there were a couple spots that weren't as what I would call dead quiet. But as far as the sonics go, man, this thing just really, really leaves an impression on you to the degree to where if you had any doubt about what the best version is, I think this one is going to be across the board in anybody's book, the best one to have. So congratulations to Bernie, to Chad, to all the team at Analog Productions for the work that they did to get this accomplished. I know this was kind of the 500-pound elephant in the room. Everybody wanted to see that this one was done right and was done well. people were saying if this one gets messed up, well, it's trouble. Well, it isn't. It's really all we expected and maybe even a bit more. So as always, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please consider ringing the bell below, picking the all option, and a thumbs up or like is appreciated, as are your comments. So this has been a fun one. This has been one that I'm really going to stop the video in a second and turn it back on and listen to it again. It sounds that good. So until we catch you next time, thanks for joining me here on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. Take care, everybody.